Welcome to Read News Today. The embattled chairwoman of the New York City Housing Authority faced withering questioning at the City Council on Tuesday about lapses in lead paint inspections, and she struggled to explain communication failures that left the public uninformed about the risks they posed. Even as she defended the city's response, the chairwoman, LOLA'S, conceded that more could have been done over the past year to tell residents what top officials learned in mid-2016. Lead paint inspections ceased in 2012 and were not restarted for nearly 4 years. Her responses prompted exclamations of disbelief from a large audience and expressions of frustration from some council members. Many of the questions focused on the long delay between when officials learned of the problems with inspections, between April 2016 and June 2016, according to Ms. LOLA'S, and when City Hall and the agency acknowledged the lapses publicly for the first time, in July 2017. At one point, a man in the audience chanted, "Lock her up," referring to Ms. LOLA'S. Another interrupted to attack the panel for covering for the mayor. Councilman Rafael Salamanca Jr., who represents the South Bronx, asked Ms. LOLA'S, "Why did you wait more than a year before telling the families?" Ms. LOLA'S replied, "We could have communicated in a more precise way." She noted that families in 4,200 untested apartments that house children under 6 received a notice in May 2016 saying that the authority needed to check for lead. But that notice did not mention the prior inspection lapses. "I, too, have lost trust in NYCHA and in this administration," Councilman Salamanca said. The hearing was perhaps the most contentious between the City Council and members of Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration since City Hall faced an outcry over communication failures that allowed a former nursing home in Lower Manhattan, known as Rivington House, to be sold to condominium developers. The hearing was called in response to a report on the lead paint inspections issued last month by the city's investigation department. It found that over 4 years, the Housing Authority had filed false certifications with the federal government for the inspections, which are required annually. The inspection failures are part of a federal inquiry into the agency that dates to 2015 and that Mr. de Blasio, a Democrat, has suggested could end with the appointment of a federal monitor. Ms. LOLA'S insisted that even though she certified inspections with the federal government in 2016, despite knowing that they had not been completed, she had no intention of making a false certification. She said she had raised the issue with the Federal Housing Department earlier that year, before signing the certification. "My regret is that we didn't tell people more, sooner," she said. "There was no intent to mislead or deceive our regulators." Councilman Richie Torres, who presided over the hearing, said, "I'm asking about the general public." Ms. LOLA'S testified in March 2016 that the agency was in compliance with regulations on lead inspections. After she found out days later that her testimony had been false, she did not tell anyone at the City Council, a point hammered on by Mr. Torres and others. "It's more than simply failing to communicate more," he said. "You made a willful choice not to correct a false statement that you made under oath and on the public record." Even as she endured some caustic and pointed questions in nearly 4 hours of testimony, Ms. LOLA'S added little to what was known about the timeline of events and the city's response to the lapses. But she did fill in one unknown: how she finally learned that the city had not been in compliance with lead paint regulations. She said she discovered the lapses as part of the Housing Authority's response to a federal request for information, known as a civil investigative demand, dated October 29, 2015. The onset of the CID and the eventual work in response to that, she said, made us have to ask some questions. She said the answer, that the authority was not complying with local law on inspections, did not come until April 2016. She said she learned only this year that the agency had been making false certifications, a situation that began at the tail end of the Bloomberg administration. In 2012, The federal government eased requirements for the inspection of general conditions in public housing apartments. As a result of those changes, the city also stopped doing annual checks for lead in about 55,000 apartments that could contain a hazard, as required by the federal government, and in 4,200 apartments that house children under 6, as is called for by city law. The Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Herminia Palacio, tried to situate the lapses in the context of an overall decrease in lead poisoning in New York City, and a lower occurrence of elevated lead levels in public housing than in privately owned apartments. But it is not known how many children were affected, and some lead removal was done by workers who were not properly trained. The city is setting up a hotline to offer free lead testing for children who live in about 2,300 apartments where such work was done in 2016.